Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are tackling a text that acts as a sort of, well, a dividing line in the history of ideas. You know how there are certain books where, before they were written, people thought about the world one way, and after, they couldn't help but see it different?
Oh, absolutely. Darwin's Origin of Species is one.
Right.
Marx's Capital is another.
Exactly. And today, we are looking at the linguistic equivalent of that. We are diving into Ferdinand de Saussure's course in general linguistics.
Mm-hmm.
This is the book that didn't just change how we study grammar.
Yeah.
It effectively invented modern linguistics and gave birth to structuralism.
It really did.
It shifted the focus from, looking at dusty word histories to analyzing the living, breathing structure of communication.
It is the bedrock. I mean, if you want to understand semiotics, literary theory, or even anthropology today, you have to grapple with Saussure. But what makes this book particularly fascinating, and we should probably use air quotes around book,
Right.
is that Saussure never actually sat down and wrote it.
That was the first thing in the research notes that just caught me completely off guard. We are treating this as the Bible of linguistics, but the author died in 1913 without ever publishing it.
That's correct. He was a professor in Geneva, and he gave a series of legendary lectures on general linguistics. After he passed away, his colleagues and students, specifically Bali and Sechehe, they realized that his insights were just too revolutionary to lose.
Well, they collected the notes.
Exactly. So they gathered everyone's notebooks, cross-referenced the lecture notes, and reconstructed his entire system.
It's amazing to think that this foundational text is basically a remix of student scribbles. It gives the whole thing a very specific texture, doesn't it?
It does.
We aren't reading a polished treatise. We are getting these synthesized greatest hits of a brilliant mind trying to explain a new science to a room full of students.
And that context is so important because he was trying to break those students of a specific habit. At the time, linguistics was dominated by philology.
Historical linguistics.
Yes, historical linguistics. It was all about tracing roots, how a Sanskrit word became a Latin word, which then became a French word.
It was linguistic genealogy, basically.
Exactly. And Saussure respected that, but he felt it missed the forest for the trees. He argued that knowing where a word came from doesn't tell you how it works right now.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to pivot the field from studying the history of the building to studying the blueprints of the architecture itself.
And that pivot begins with a massive proposal. He doesn't just want to fix linguistics. He wants to create an entirely new discipline.
Semiology.
Semiology.
Right. He creates a hierarchy. He says, look, language is just one system of signs among many. You have military signals, you have pantomime, you have polite formulas. He proposed a general science of signs. Semiology and linguistics would just be one specific branch of that.
So, to understand his linguistics, we have to understand his definition of the sign. And this is where I think people get tripped up, because we use the word sign so loosely, like a stop sign.
Right.
But for Saussure, a sign isn't a physical object.
No, and this is the first big conceptual leap you have to make. For Saussure, the linguistic sign is a psychological entity. It has two sides, like a coin. You cannot separate them. There is the signifier and the signified.
Okay, let's break those down, because these terms get thrown around in liberal arts colleges like confetti, but Saussure creates very strict definitions for them.
He does. The signified is the concept. It's the mental idea. If I say the word cat, the signified is the abstract concept of that furry, four-legged creature that meows.
Okay, and the signifier?
The signifier is the sound image. And you have to be careful here. It's not the physical sound hitting your ear. It's the psychological imprint of that sound.
Oh, interesting.
When you talk to yourself in your head, you aren't making physical noise, but you can hear the words. That is the signifier.
So the sign is the unbreakable bond between that sound image and the concept.
Yeah.
But here is the part that arguably changed philosophy forever. The bond between them is arbitrary.
This is the crucial point. There is absolutely no internal reason why the sound pattern S-I-S-T-E-R should be linked to the concept of a female sibling. It could have been boing or zorp.
Right. And the press is that in French it's sur, in Spanish it's hermana. If there was some kind of natural connection between the sound and the meaning, every language would sound the same.
Precisely. But let's look at the consequence of that, because I think it's easy to nod and say, okay, words are made up. But if the sign is arbitrary, it means language isn't just a list of labels we slap onto the world.
You mean it's not a nomenclature? We don't just see a tree and agree to call it tree.
Exactly. Because if language were just a list of names for pre-existing things, translations between languages would be perfect one-to-one matches. But they aren't. Saussure implies that by choosing different arbitrary signs, different languages actually slice up reality in different ways.
That reminds me of the classic example of colors. The spectrum of light is continuous, but English slices a chunk and calls it blue. But Russian slices that same chunk into two distinct concepts, goluboy and sini, light blue and dark blue. They aren't different words for the same thing, they're different categories of reality.
That is the power of the arbitrary sign. We don't just speak the world, we construct it through these arbitrary links. But this leads to a paradox that Saussure highlights, which I find fascinating. If the signs are arbitrary and there's no natural reason for them, why can't I just change them?
I was thinking about that. If I decided tomorrow that cat now refers to a sandwich, and I start ordering a grilled cheese cat at lunch, I'm not innovating language. I'm just being incoherent.
You would definitely get some strange looks. Saussure calls this the mutability and immutability of the sign. The system is immutable, unchangeable by the individual.
Right.
You are born into the system. It is a heritage. It is forced upon you by the collective mind.
That phrase, collective mind, comes up a few times. It sounds almost sci-fi.
It does, but he means it sociologically. Language doesn't exist in my brain or your brain fully. It exists in the collective mass of all speakers. It's a social contract that we all signed without reading the terms. Because it's arbitrary, it relies purely on tradition. The only reason cat means cat is because it did yesterday.
So, we are trapped in a system we didn't build and can't control. But we know language does change. I mean, we don't speak like Chaucer.
Right. And that is the mutability side. Because the bond is arbitrary, there is nothing anchoring it. Over long periods, centuries, the bond shifts, sounds change, meanings drift, but it happens blindly and it happens to the collective. You can't force it.
This tension between the system and the individual leads us to probably the most famous dichotomy in the book. This is the tool everyone steals from Saussure, Lang and Carroll.
Yes, if you take one thing away from this deep dive, it should be this distinction, Lang versus Parole.
I always find analogies help here. I tend to think of Lang as in the rules of chess, the rule book, the possible moves, the structure that exists before anyone sits down to play.
Yes.
And parole is the actual game being played by two specific people in a specific room.
That is the classic analogy, and it holds up perfectly. Language is the potential. It's the dictionary and grammar rules stored in our collective heads. It is social, and it is essential.
And parole speech is the execution.
Right. Parole is what you and I are doing right now. It involves our specific vocal cords, our specific choice of words, our intonation, and yes, our errors. It is individual and active.
But Saussure takes a pretty hard stance here. He basically looks at parole, the actual act of speaking, and throws it in the trash bin of science. He says we shouldn't study it.
It sounds harsh, doesn't it? But think about it from a scientific perspective. Parole is chaos. It varies from person to person. If you study parole, you're just studying anecdotes. Saussure argues that to have a rigorous science of linguistics, you must isolate the object of study, and that object is Lang, the system itself.
He wants to study the sheet music, not the specific performance that might have a few wrong notes.
Exactly, because the system is what makes communication possible. We can only understand each other's parole because we share the same Lang.
Now, even though he focuses on the psychological system, he doesn't ignore the physical reality of sound entirely. There was a section in the notes about an appendix on physiological phonetics that felt incredibly technical. He gets into the mechanics of the throat.
He does, and it's important to note why. Even though the signifier is a sound image in the mind, it relies on the instrument of the body. He breaks down the production of sound into abduction and adduction.
Which sounded really medical to me.
It's basically the mechanics of the glottis. Abduction is opening the vocal cords wide to let air rush in. Adduction is snapping them shut to create vibration. Saussure gets very granular here. He actually creates a classification scale from 0 to 6 based on how open the mouth and throat are.
A 0 to 6 scale.
Yes, imagine a 0. That is complete closure, silence. Or a hard stop consonant like P or T where you block the airflow entirely. Then as you move up the scale 1, 2, 3, the aperture opens. By the time you get to 6, you are at the widest opening, which produces the vowel ah.
So he's mapping the physical aperture of the human instrument.
He is. He wants to show that while language is abstract, it is grounded in the discrete units of sound we can physically produce. You can't have a signifier without the distinct capability to make these different sounds. The physical constraint shapes the psychological system.
This idea of distinct units segues perfectly into what I think is the most challenging but also the most rewarding part of Saussure's theory, the distinction between synchronic and diachronic linguistics.
This is where he really separates himself from the historians of his time.
So diachronic implies time, right? Moving through time.
Yes. Diachronic linguistics is evolutionary. It's the movie version. It watches how a word changes over 1,000 years. It's what everyone was doing before Saussure.
And synchronic.
Synchronic is static. It means at the same time. It is a snapshot. It pauses the film and looks at the relationships between words at a single frozen moment.
And Saussure argues that the speaker, the person actually using the language, only knows the synchronic state.
Correct. And this is a profound insight. When you use the word silly today, you mean foolish or funny. Historically, in Old English, silly meant blessed or happy.
Right.
But does knowing that history change what you mean right now when you call your dog silly?
No. The history is invisible to me. The system works because of the current value of the word.
Exactly. The system only exists in the present. So to understand Lang, you have to study it synchronically. You have to ignore the history and look at the network of relationships right now.
And this brings us to the concept of value and difference. This was the aha moment for me in the reading. Saussure says that in this system, there are no positive terms. There are only differences.
It's the most famous quote from the book. In language, there are only differences without positive terms.
Let's unpack that because it sounds like a riddle.
It means that a word doesn't have a meaning because of some intrinsic essence inside it. It has meaning only because it is not other words.
So hot doesn't mean high temperature. It means not cold and not lukewarm.
Precisely. Meaning is determined by boundaries. Think of the game of chess again. A knight is defined not by the material it's made of. It could be wood, plastic, or a piece of bread. It is defined by how it moves differently from a pawn or a bishop. Its value is purely relational.
That is wild. It implies that if I removed the word lukewarm from the English language, the meaning of hot and cold would actually change. They would expand to fill the gap.
They absolutely would. The system is a delicate web of values. If you pull on one thread, the tension changes across the whole web.
Saussure identifies two ways these threads connect. He calls them syntagmatic and associative relations.
Yes, these are the two axes of language.
Syntagmatic relations are linear, right? Like a chain.
Correct. You can't pronounce two words at once. You have to string them out in time. The cat sat. That is a syntagmatic chain. The meaning depends on the order and the combination. It's visible and present in the sentence.
And associative relations.
Those are vertical. They happen in the mind. They're a cloud of connections. If I say education, your brain might instantly associate it with teacher, textbook, training, or maybe even upbringing.
So syntagmatic is what's on the page, and associative is the mental web that the word pulls up from the depths of Lang.
Exactly. And the intersection of those two axes is how we generate meaning.
So we have this closed static system, this synchronic system, defined by negative values, frozen in a snapshot. But we established earlier that language does move. It spreads across maps and borders. How does Saussure reconcile this rigid structure with the messy reality of dialects?
He addresses this in the section on geographical linguistics. And again, he challenges our assumptions. We tend to think of languages as having hard borders. France ends here, Germany starts here.
But Saussure says there are no natural boundaries.
No. He says dialects are a continuum. If you walked from Paris to Rome in 1915, stopping at every village, you wouldn't find a spot where French suddenly stops and Italian begins. You would just hear slight shifts, village by village.
So how does change spread, if not by distinct groups?
He uses the concept of waves of innovation. Imagine throwing a stone into a pond. A new pronunciation or a new slang term starts at a focal point and ripples outward.
And what determines how far the wave goes?
The force of intercourse.
A phrase that has definitely changed meaning diachronically.
Indeed. He means social intercourse communication density. If a community talks to each other constantly, the waves of innovation spread quickly and the language stays unified.
Okay.
If a mountain range or a river separates them, the density drops, the waves stop, and the dialects drift apart.
It just reinforces the idea that language is purely social. It's held together by people talking.
It connects back to the wave theory of Johannes Schmidt. Saussure argues you don't need migration or conquest to create new languages. You just need enough distance and time for the waves of innovation to create different patterns.
As we near the end of the course, Saussure touches on retrospective linguistics, using language to guess at the past, exploring things like linguistic paleontology.
He does, but he's skeptical. He warns us that because the sign is arbitrary and because meanings shift so easily, we can't be too confident. Just because two cultures share a word for copper doesn't mean they lived in the same place or had the same technology. The word could have been borrowed, the meaning could have drifted.
It seems like he ends the book by pulling the camera back to his main thesis. He strips away the history, the geography, the physical anthropology, and asks, what is the core object of linguistics?
And his answer is the famous final line of the text. The only true object of linguistics is the language considered in and for itself.
The internal structure.
Yes. He is saying, stop looking at what language reflects in history or society. Look at the mechanism. Look at the system of signs. By doing that, he didn't just define linguistics, he gave us a model for structuralism that would dominate the 20th century.
Wow.
He taught us to look for the hidden rules that govern the game.
It's a sobering thought to leave on. We walk around feeling like we are the masters of our own thoughts, expressing ourselves freely.
But are we?
Based on Saussure, not really. We are operating a massive, ancient machine that we didn't design. We are pulling levers, these arbitrary signs that only have meaning because they aren't other levers.
And that machine exists nowhere in the physical world. It takes up no space. It lives entirely in the collective mind of the species. It's a ghost machine, but it controls everything we communicate.
That is something to chew on the next time you try to find the right word for something. You're just looking for the right negative value in the web.
Right.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Saussure.
My pleasure.
We'll see you next time. Keep listening.